Some say it's more dangerous in prison than it is out, and if they're talking about one of the prisons that we're gonna show you in this video, they might just be right. Prison can be a gnarly place, packed to the rafters with some of the scariest, most violent, and most sadistic men and women the world has ever seen. If you do get caught committing a crime, you're gonna pray you get locked up anywhere other than these places. These are the most dangerous prisons in the world. Number 15. Black Dolphin Prison. We all know Russians are tough as nails, but what does that mean for their justice system? Much like their people, the Russian prisons are incredibly tough on their inmates compared to various other countries.
The Black Dolphin, Russia's highest security prison.
However, the Black Dolphin prison takes the prize as Russia's toughest of all. This extremely high-security prison on the border of Kazakhstan holds some of the country's biggest criminals, including serial killers, terrorists, and even cannibals of all things. National Geographic has done a pretty in-depth documentary about this prison, but the bottom line is that you'd be better off not being there. Since the inmates have considered crimes beyond comprehension, it's clear why they must be isolated in small, single cells. The prisoners are only allowed out for 90 minutes each day for exercise and daylight, which means that they spend nearly 23 hours each day locked away. They are also monitored for the full 24 hours, which includes continuous CCTV surveillance and guard checks every 15 minutes. You'd understandably go insane if you had to go through this process daily, but it should be argued that these prisoners were well past that stage before entering the boundaries of the Black Dolphin. Like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell right now, or Slenderman will come from under your bed while you're sleeping. Number 14. CARANDIRU Prison. The CARANDIRU Penitentiary is easily the worst prison in history, as it was the site of, quite possibly, the largest human rights violations in the history of Brazil. The prison is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and was built by Samuel das Neves as a means to reach the demands of the 1890 Criminal Code. During its peak at the end of the 20th century, the prison was seriously overcrowded. In fact, at one point, it held around 8,000 prisoners, with just 1,000 guards to watch them. These poor individuals were tasked with controlling the unruly crowd, which proved to be an impossible task on more than one occasion. As you could imagine, the prison walls held some of Brazil's most vicious criminals, and conditions inside the prison suffered further when more of them flowed through the system. The blocks were littered with malnutrition and diseases, along with countless injuries, and medical staff were kept to a minimum. And let's face it, they weren't exactly keen to help out either. Many prisoners were treated without the use of pain relief. Imagine that. In 1992, CARANDIRU became infamous for a massive riot that resulted in the deaths of 111 prisoners. The police declined to negotiate with the prisoners' demands and sent the military inside instead. The horrific death toll was the result. The riot was severely mishandled, with many innocent parties slaughtered. The matter went to court, and commanding officer Colonel Uberatan Guimarães, who oversaw the operation, was sentenced to life in prison. He was granted release and was assassinated in 2006. Number 13. Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp, also called Gitmo, is a United States detention facility in the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, located on the coast of Guantanamo Bay in southeastern Cuba.
Justice moves slowly at Guantanamo Bay.
Construction began in 2002 with the camp built in stages. It was initially used to hold Muslim militants and terrorists that were captured by the US forces in Afghanistan or Iraq. The facility came under fire across the globe when information was leaked over the treatment of detainees under the Geneva Convention. Following the 9/11 terror attacks in 2001, the camp began receiving suspected members of Al-Qaeda, those believed responsible for the attacks. At the time, US officials felt it was necessary to use as many tactics as possible to get information on the whereabouts of their leader, Osama bin Laden. Some of these tactics were clearly outside of the law. Since its construction, almost 800 men have passed through Guantanamo Bay, but just 40 remain today. And you can guarantee these prisoners are the worst of the worst. Number 12. North Korean Prison Camp 22. North Korea has their fair share of prison camps, and the network is growing every day. In fact, it's estimated that upwards of 200,000 prisoners are occupied in these camps, which have been compared to those operated by the Nazis in the Second World War. Now that's tough.
The North Korean authorities have consistently denied the existence of prison camps.
The information about these camps is very sparse, although there has been the odd escapee who has told tales, most notably Shin Dong-hyuk. He spoke on 60 Minutes of his time behind the wire, which took place over a span of a horrific 23 years. There are few images of the camp, and most sightings have only come via satellite, both giving little perspective of how terrifying it is inside the walls of these camps. The Horiang political prison camp is perhaps the most infamous of them all. Given the name Camp 22, this facility apparently held around 50,000 prisoners at its peak. The camp is said to have closed sometime in 2012. Media reports have concluded that many prisoners were transferred to another camp, Camp 16. This was the Hwasong political prison camp. Several thousand prisoners are believed to have been sent there, and most remain unaccounted for. They simply disappeared off the face of the earth. That's more than a little suspicious, don't you think? Number 11. Nairobi Prison, Kenya. The Nairobi prison in Kenya is easily the most overcrowded in the world. Originally designed to hold a maximum of 800 inmates, numbers have known to climb into the thousands. And if that isn't bad enough, the prison also has 250 short-term prisoners that must be confined to a room only meant to hold 50 people.
The women sleep between 30 and 40 to a room here.
I can only imagine how cozy that must be. When it comes to the basics, the prison is also seriously lacking. Some cells don't have a bed, there is limited clothing available, and the medical options are almost non-existent. Now, many of us have our opinions when it comes to what prisoners deserve, but compared to other prisons around the world, these guys have it tough. It seems unfair to think that an insane prisoner gets their own padded cell, but one of clear mind lacks any space to themselves whatsoever. The Nairobi prison is also home to several foreign nationals as well. In an interview, Nigerian prisoner Colin Alexander said that those living in the prison were surviving by the grace of God. It's fair to say that the biggest danger in this prison isn't the criminals themselves, but rather just surviving the treatment inside Nairobi's walls. Number 10. BUTYRKA Prison, Russia. The Russian capital of Moscow is home to a prison that many have deemed impossible to escape. BUTYRKA is a prison located north of the city center and is apparently a true gauntlet for anyone wishing to survive. Particularly for those who have attempted escape. Following the 18th century, the prison became well known as the BUTYRKA Prison Fortress. It was rebuilt into a real castle with 4 towers and a fortress wall. BUTYRKA became a transit prison, with over 30,000 convicts leaving each year to other country jails and exile. It has since come under fire for overcrowding, fire safety violations, and poor living conditions. Over the years, the prison has held many notable figures, such as Soviet-era writers Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Isaac Babel. Adolf Hitler's nephew Heinrich was also held behind its bars for some time. BUTYRKA has also been visited by many celebrities throughout the years, possibly looking for some inspiration, with one of the most notable being illusionist Harry Houdini in 1908. Houdini managed to escape after 28 minutes from what was thought to be the prison's most unescapable apparatus, a metal box which was used to transport convicts to Siberia. Turns out it's not escape-proof after all. Number 9. DIYARBAKIR Prison, Turkey. Most prisons have a backstory, an origin, a past, and it's usually an interesting one at that, but some of these are best forgotten, and for very good reason. One such case is that of the many Turkish prisons. Quite a number of them contain rather shady pasts dating back generations, and DIYARBAKIR might just be the shadiest of them all. The prison has not shied away from imprisoning children, some for life. It also has a history of overcrowding and sewerage in its halls. How disturbing. Most of us have seen the films set in prisons, where the guards simply don't get along with the prisoners. But in DIYARBAKIR, this hatred took a deadly turn in 1996. A massacre was planned and carried out by the guards, leaving 10 inmates dead and 23 injured. The guards were rumored to have been equipped with full riot gear, batons, and truncheons. There was no exact confirmation of who was behind this attack, but evidence heavily suggested it was masterminded from within. At DIYARBAKIR, prisoners have no rights, very little health care, and no sporting or cultural activities at all. The Turkish government are trying to reverse such treatment. However, who knows when the tide will turn on what can only be described as a serious human rights violation. Number 8. ALCATRAZ Prison. This is quite easily the most well-known and famous prison around the world. And for good reason. The ALCATRAZ Federal Prison is the highest security prison in the United States. Situated 1.25 miles off the coast of San Francisco, California, it was operational from August 11, 1934 until its closure on March 21, 1963. It sits alone on its own little island, surrounded by water and hefty steel and concrete reinforcement, and is arguably the most inescapable prison on the planet.
Normally they would put a guard with him at all times, but he said, oh, just go and check on him now and then.
ALCATRAZ is practically a huge rock in the center of a moat. The only creature that's interested in being anywhere near the prison's boundary are the great white sharks that inhabit the waters. These fish almost act as a secondary gauntlet for those who do manage to escape the prison. In fact, if you get out of the prison alive, evade the sharks, and cope with the extremely cold water and long swim to shore, you almost deserve to be free. The name ALCATRAZ was given to the prison for a specific reason, as at the time of its conception, it represented the negative side of life as an American. The prison has held some of the worst criminals the world has ever seen. It was so notorious that gangsters were known to beg to go there just to enhance their reputation in the eyes of other criminals. Sounds a little ridiculous to me. Number 7. Rikers Island, New York, New York Prison. The New York prison Rikers Island has a rather notorious past and contains a plethora of stories riddled with mass cruelty and abuse said to be suffered within its walls.
Talk to me, man. Fuck is wrong?
Famous inmates included the likes of Tupac Shakur, Sid Vicious, and Mark David Chapman. Situated on a 413-acre island between Queens and the Bronx, Rikers Island is among the world's largest jails and holds about 7,000 inmates. At its peak in the 1990s, 20,000 inmates called it home. Must have been a serious squeeze. Ex-prisoner Vidal Guzman compared his experience to the fiery depths of hell. He was imprisoned in Rikers at just 16 years old. As he crossed over the bridge and into the prison, a guard is said to have told him to get ready for gladiator school. In his first week under lock and key, Guzman witnessed the death of 2 teenagers. He said the experience shaped his mind. The prison is considered a symbol of brutality and inhumanity, and has had its fair share of nicknames over the years, including Gladiator School, Torture Island, and The Oven. The Oven was in reference to how hot the concrete floors and steel doors become when exposed to the summer heat, but all nicknames describe the bleak outlook for those inside the prison walls. Mass incarceration isn't considered a successful model, and New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson is keen to see the facility closed for good. This may happen in the near future, with 2026 said to be the year. But how much more damage to the hearts and minds of the incarcerated can be done between now and then? We can only wait and see. Number 6. La Sabaneta Prison, Venezuela, Maracaibo. Like most of the entries on this list, the Maracaibo National Prison in Venezuela has a reputation for being incredibly violent on the inside. Also known as the Sabaneta Prison, it has been operational since 1958, most recently under Minister Iris Varela. Like other Venezuelan prisons, La Sabaneta had many issues of being overcrowded, lacking in medical care, food, and water. On top of that, violence among prisoners is at an all-time high, with gangs of inmates in control of certain aspects of the facility. The prison was designed to hold somewhere around 700 inmates. However, nowadays, there are a whopping 3,700 prisoners incarcerated there. If that isn't bad enough, these prisoners are only watched by a mere 40 guards. That's a tough ask. Each 8 by 12 foot cell is extremely overcrowded, forcing inmates to string up their own hammocks to obtain some form of sleeping space. Most have to sleep on the floor with barely any space between each other. All inmates bathe with the same water bucket and use plastic bags for toilets. It's all rather grim. Many inmates carry knives for protection, as violence has always been rife in the prison. One example of this violence is the riots that broke out in 1994. These riots resulted in the death of 108 prisoners in an intense gunfight. There are also frequent fires, murders, and even beheadings. It's clear the guards have almost given up. Hard to blame them, really, given the lack of staff. Number 5. Abu Ghraib Prison, Iraq. During the time of Saddam Hussein, Abu Ghraib, located west of Baghdad, became one of the world's most infamous prison facilities for all the wrong reasons.
We were never trained to be prison guards. The higher-ups had used your imagination.
The prison itself jammed as many as 50,000 men and women inside its walls, making the living conditions even more difficult. It was severely overcrowded, and prisoners endured torture and execution on almost a daily basis. Being jammed into 12 by 12 foot cells certainly didn't help proceedings either, as those that avoided torture and other means of violence would still get violently ill and perish regardless. We've heard horror stories about these sorts of situations during World War II, and this is certainly no different. Number 4. PETAK Island Prison, Vologda, Russia. We've spoken about the daunting nature of Alcatraz in the United States, but what about a prison that is nicknamed Alcatraz of Russia? Surely, with a name like that, it can't be a good place. This prison is so bad that if you even manage to walk out at the completion of your sentence, you are not likely to ever be the same. There have been many cases of dangerous criminals leaving in far worse mental conditions than when they entered, often causing them to end up back in there. That's hardly the purpose of prison though, right? A prison psychologist said that PETAK Island destroys people, stealing their souls and leaving them a shadow of their former former selves. They are said to have no idea how to exist outside the prison walls, and most come back to where they feel at home. To do that, they must commit another heinous crime, so that's not good at all. Experts believe ex-prisoners spend the first 9 months or so adapting, and then their personalities rapidly decline. But it's hard to imagine anyone spending 25 years inside a place like this without being scarred somehow, isn't it? Number 3. SUPERMAX Prison in Colorado. Colorado plays host to a super maximum security prison, which has one of the most secure levels of custody in not only American prison systems, but also countless other countries.
Inmates spend an average of 23 hours a day.
The main reason for this is to hold certain inmates and criminals that are classified as the highest security risks, aka the worst criminals imaginable, the ones that are the biggest threats to national and global security. The prison is well separated and designed, meaning prisoners will sit in their 7 by 12 foot cells for as long as 20 to 24 hours a day alone. They don't have the ability to view or interact with adjacent cells and the inmates inside of them. This is due to the solid walls in between each cell. It is the ultimate bubble of isolation in which no human could possibly escape. Classed as a supermax prison, it provides a higher level of custody than a maximum security prison and houses male prisoners only. It is located 5,000 feet above sea level at the foothills of Colorado's Southern Rockies, so it is extremely remote. Described by those who have been there as hell on earth, this prison is home to some of the world's most notorious prisoners, most of whom will never see the light of day again. Number 2. La Sante Prison, Paris, France. La Sante Prison is actually the only prison in Paris. It is a notorious and historic site where many infamous criminals were held captive. As with most prisons, people who have never been sent to one have a profound interest of what's inside. La Sante Prison is now open for tours, and many have been given the opportunity to view the horrors within this fascinating site. With a name that translates to Good Health Prison, La Sante opened in 1867 and has held criminals such as Carlos the Jackal and infamous killer and escape artist Jacques Mesrine. Mesrine managed to escape La Sante along with every other prison that he was sent to. Although its name is linked to good health, the reality unfortunately doesn't reflect that. Historically, La Sante has been known for its rather inhumane conditions. A doctor who visited the facility said the inmates were filthy, vermin were left uncontrolled, and the mentally ill were prone to self-harm due to a lack of treatment. The prison stands empty at the moment, and it is rumored major renovations are being undertaken. Sounds like it's about time, don't you think? Number 1. Attica Correction Facility, New York. Attica Correctional Facility, a prison in Attica, New York, is quite possibly the last of its kind in the US, in terms of being called a big house prison anyway. The facility was built in 1931 and was one of the biggest expenses for penal facilities at the time of its conception.
From the moment I got there, I was conscious of the racial prejudice.
State officials thought that this would solve issues with inmates and riots following some serious altercations at state prisons in 1929. The facility included a wall that was 2 foot thick and 30 foot high, along with a series of guard towers. It was essentially an impenetrable fortress. The conditions for prisoners, however, were, as you would imagine, horrific. They are believed to have spent up to 14 hours a day in their cells, which were not very big. There was also little to no medical care, cultural activities, and healthy food options. Many that left after serving their sentence revealed their experience as dehumanizing, a common theme amongst many of those released. During the 60s and 70s, the prison population mainly consisted of poor men from New York cities, although an estimated 66% of 1,200 inmates were Hispanic or African American. Prison authorities were strict on political political organizations, and very against religious services. The ethnic and cultural differences caused plenty of tension over the years, and resulted in hostile actions within the prison's little community. It's hard to believe that notorious criminals locked up in jail are just as likely to offend as they are if they were free. For some of these prisons, the rules are made to be broken, and only the toughest of the tough survive. It sounds hideous, and it probably is. Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on screen right now. See you next time!